of us are like, vaccines are the only way out of this. Others are natural immunity. That's how we move on. But I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, at home, in the dark, with the doors locked and the shades pulled, we will admit, quietly, internally, that maybe the other side has a point or two that are willing, or that are worthy of consideration. Is that fair? Yeah. Yeah, you can't have that conversation in China, not just because it's an information state. The CCP has, until very recently, been very successful at keeping COVID out of the general population. No one has natural immunity. And we found out over a year ago from the people who had used the Chinese vaccine that were not in China, that the Chinese vaccine doesn't work at all versus Omicron. Now, we have had protests. And this is getting very colorful very fast. Now, China is not like the United States when it comes to a legal or political structure. So we have national politics and state politics and local politics. We have a business community. We have academia. We have cultural groups. We have a civic environment. None of this exists in China. Our systems are loud. They are messy. They are difficult to predict and manage. But there's all these competing sources of legitimacy and power. And that means if some idiot glues themselves to a painting, civilization does not fall apart. But in China, all policy starts and ends with one person. And so within 72 hours of those protests starting over Thanksgiving, it was no longer just about COVID. It was about Xi and the job he was doing and not doing. It was a direct threat to the sole source of authority within the entire system. And so the open question I had was, where does this go? Because Chinese history tells us it goes in one of two directions. Number one, you get a nationwide lockdown for political reasons to crush this in its infancy, because the alternative is that it goes the other direction and it spins apart as everyone starts challenging everything. It appears, for the moment, we're going with option two. Xi's one dude. Even if he, by some miraculous occurrence, was the smartest person and the best manager on the planet, he cannot micromanage a country of 1.4 billion people. And so we're now seeing local and provincial governments with no guidance from the federal government in China making up policy as they go. And it's already starting to extend beyond health policy. And then, of course, don't forget that COVID still gets a vote in this. The Chinese population has no protection. They've never been exposed. We lost 1 million people in this country over 2.5 years. They are now experiencing their first outbreak, a nationwide outbreak in every metro after experiencing several hundred super spreader events on the same day. Their health system has no critical care component. On average, they are older than Americans. On average, they are less healthy than Americans. In relative terms, they have almost twice the rate of diabetes that Americans have. And it's all happening at once. We are talking millions of deaths. This is potentially a regime-ending experience right here, before you deal with the energy situation, before you deal with the tech and the manufacturing situation. The best case scenario here is just that their manufacturing system shuts down for a few months. Do not rely on the Chinese for anything. They're not going to be around much longer. We'll get back to that too. Let's talk finance. Yeah, don't call your broker yet, folks. We got a lot more to do. This is net worth by decade of age bracket. As you get older, you get better at your job, you get raises, your income goes up. But the real magic happens when you turn 50. Because when you turn 50, your single biggest expense, your last kid, leaves home and becomes someone else's problem. And the money that you save because your kid is now gone, yeah, I see people over there high-fiving because you just turned 50 and the last one's gone, yep. The money that you save because your last kid is gone, you put towards your second biggest expense, which is your house. And on average, you will have paid that down by the time you're 55. So age 55 to 65, your expenses are under control, your income is continuing to rise, this is the wealthiest you will ever be. And the money that you invest to prepare for your retirement in that 10-year age bracket, that is what it's all about. That is 70% of global private capital. That is literally the money that makes the world move. And normally, this doesn't matter at all, because normally we have a demographic structure that looks like this. You're looking at a standard pyramid. Children at the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees at the top, men on one side, women on the other. This is a nearly pre-industrial structure. This is Nigeria. And you'll notice that that thin sliver at the top, that's 65, is tiny. Doesn't really matter what they do. And then there's more people age 64 below that, and 63 below that. And we've more or less had some version of this demographic now for 4,000 years of recorded history. Until 1945. Because in 1945, the Americans changed the way the world worked. It used to be that if you had iron ore and coal and oil and food, you could make something of yourself. You could expand into empire. But if you lacked one of those four things, you were probably a colony. But the empires died in World War II. And the Americans created this thing we know as globalization. We used our Navy to patrol the seas so that anyone could go anywhere at any time and interface with any economic partner. And suddenly you didn't need those four things. You only needed one of them. And you could trade for the other three. And we all started to industrialize together. Not from the same starting point, not at the same pace, but for the first time, all of humanity was on the same road. And that changed national economics. Because as you industrialize, people move off the farm and into the cities to take industrial jobs, which means personal economics changed. Because when you live on the farm, kids are free labor. You have as many as you can put up with. But when you live in an urban condo, kids are not free labor. They're very expensive, very dirty, very loud, very annoying pieces of mobile furniture. And adults are not stupid, so we had fewer of them. And 75 years on, this is what our demographics look like today. The baby boomers are the largest generation we've ever had. On average, they turn 65 this quarter. We are there. We've always known that this was coming since the 1960s. Is everyone ready? Yeah. Think about what this means for finance. The single largest financial population we've ever had is moving into mass retirement. When you retire, you liquidate your stocks and your bonds, you go into T-bills and cash. Because if there's a currency crisis or a market crash, you lose everything. You no longer have the income to recover. You have to go conservative. This is perfectly normal. And it has never mattered until now. Because now the largest generation ever is liquidating everything all at the same time. We have always known between January of last year and December of next year that the cost of capital in the United States, because of just this factor, has to go up by at least a factor of 5.